Hello, and welcome back to the fourth devlog. It's been a little longer than I had originally intended, but I'll talk a little bit about that closer to the end of the video. Okay guys, so I've gone through all the footage for this devlog, and I'm sorry to say that there aren't going to be any immature jokes this episode. We're putting all of that behind us, no more references to any badly drawn items or the lower half of any enemy sprites. And as usual with these devlogs, there's a lot of ideas floating around, but nothing is actually close to being finished yet. I've made a lot of changes to the sprite map in the past couple weeks, so let's talk about my bush. No, not this bush, this bush. Well, it's not really a bush, it's more of like a tall grass, and I'm not even trying to focus on this sprite in particular, but all of these sprites that have been updated in the forest room. We have new rocks with moss, we have tall grass, we have different floor tiles, we have different wall tiles, we got everything. Overall, I think this is a lot better than what it was in the previous devlog. I think the foliage surrounding the room looks much better, and I'm also happy with how the bushes and rocks look now. And I think we can all agree that removing the checkered pattern from the floor tiles was a step in the right direction. The global lighting also received a slight change. I'm trying to make the forest look darker, and I think this is getting closer to what I'm going for. I think together with all of these changes to the room, I've made a step in the right direction. Now this is still the only room shape that I'm currently working with, but I have thought more about the different room variants. Because of this, I've swapped from the default Unity camera to the Cinemachine state-driven camera. The default camera worked well enough, but it only worked because this room shape fit into the camera view. The Cinemachine camera solves this issue by following the player, allowing me to create larger rooms in the future. Moving away from the tile set for a moment, I also started messing around with shader graph for the first time.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
I had been putting it off because it looked a little overwhelming to me, but I decided to give it a try and added an outline to the player character to increase visual clarity. I had originally wanted to give the outlines to all the enemies too, but I'm not sure how viable that is with the current way that I've added these outlines. The way it works right now is when the outline material is added to a sprite, it uses the tile node to create an alpha duplicate of the sprite, shifted to the right, left, top, and bottom, creating an outline effect. This is fine, however the issue arises when we talk about the fact that each of the characters is made out of multiple sprites for each body part, and adding an outline in this way will outline each body part separately. I was able to work around this for the player character by creating a duplicate of some of the body parts with the outline and then moving them to the bottom layer of the parent container. But this is definitely a workaround that isn't scalable. I'm thinking there's probably a smarter way to do this, either through creating a script that manages the outlines or maybe some community asset that I could download, but either way, it was helpful to learn. I'm going to need to jump back into shader graph anyways later to create the white sprite flashes when the enemies take damage. Hey, this is Graham just jumping in while I'm editing the video. Just wanted to say there's probably not a chance in hell I'm going to do this for every single character, so for now, only outlining the player character and probably gonna leave it at that. While we're talking about outlines, you may have noticed that I have some items over here that are also inheriting an outline. These are not such a big deal because they are just made up of a single sprite, so for now, I'm giving all the items a yellow outline. But outlines are not the main reason we're talking about items right now. In the previous video, there were a couple of problems with the item system. The items were picked up automatically when the player walked over them, which isn't what I intended. The items only applied a static variable buff to the player's stats, and we didn't have any way to display any information about the item on the screen. So what I've done is applied the interaction script that was previously on the chest object and added it to the items game object as well. Now, when you're in range of an object, you get a prompt that displays which key is needed to pick up the item. But I've gone a step further and expanded this tooltip to not just contain the pickup prompt, but also the item information. This way, players can make an educated guess on if they want to pick up the item or not. I also talked about the Effectables debuff system in the previous video. At the time, it was only working for enemy attacks, but now I've expanded it to also work when items are picked up. However, as you can see, I've still only got the movement speed debuff effect working. I still need to create some more scriptable object buffs, but more on that in another devlog. I mentioned it 2 devlogs ago, but now I've added it to the game. There is now a UI element that indicates when the dash is recharged. Woo! Yeah, baby! I originally was worried about how I was going to get this to follow the player, but then I realized you can just add a UI canvas to a prefab and change the render mode to world space, getting it to follow the game object. There were also some comments in one of the previous devlogs that it wasn't obvious where the player was shooting. I added in a custom cursor similar to Enter the Gungeon. I was originally going to add in a line renderer, but I'm unsure whether or not it's actually needed. Now, on to some more exciting stuff. I'll try to explain the new system I've been working on now that I've got the basics implemented. In most roguelikes, you run through a floor, you try not to die, and you kill everything. And then you backtrack through previous rooms, picking up items, and maybe go to a shop or a sacrifice room. What I'm trying to do is pressure the player to not do that with this system. What allows players to backtrack through the floor is time. Once the player has killed everything on a floor, they essentially have an infinite amount of time to make decisions before moving on to the next floor. Pretty much what I'm adding is a timer. And this timer will reset at the beginning of each floor. The player will have a set amount of time to go through the floor, kill everything, and visit every room. And if they don't finish the floor in the duration given, they die. Well, not exactly. That was the original idea, but I figured it wouldn't be very fun. Now what I've done instead is when the timer hits 0, shade enemies start spawning. These shade enemies cannot be killed by the player, but they will damage the player on collision. They essentially function to herd the player towards the door to the next floor. And because they are constantly following the player, it will make it very hard to interact with anything like a shop or sacrifice room. Here's a quick preview of what I have so far. You'll notice I have a timer bar at the top of the screen indicating when the player has ran out of time. For this test, I've made the bar tick down much faster than it normally would though. And that's all I have for this devlog. On a more serious note, I've been thinking a lot about this game recently, while not actually doing much development work. Everything that you've seen in this devlog was actually done 2 weeks ago, and I've been sitting on this video during that time. I've realized recently that I may have been a bit too ambitious with the scope of the game. The more I work on this, the more the scope expands. I get burnt out pretty easily, and I hyper-focus on one thing in a short burst of time. And for the first 2 months, that was this game. However, in the last month, I haven't really been feeling that drive as strongly. And it's definitely my fault. I mean, this is my first development project, and I chose probably the largest scope possible for some reason. So I'm probably going to cut back on the amount of features that I planned. I had originally planned for a dialogue system with multiple NPC characters, but I'm probably just going to shelve that for now. What does this mean for the future devlogs for this game? It's probably nothing. I don't think this is going to change anything regarding to what's shown in the game. I had originally tried to give myself a 2-week cadence as a way to ensure that I get some work done on the game while also having a consistent upload schedule. But I don't think that this is going to work for me. So from now on, the uploads are going to become a little unpredictable. Anyways, I could talk more about productivity, burnout, and just life in general for way longer, but I'll leave it there for now. The game's combat still needs a ton of work, and I also need to start working on the level generation. So I'll see you guys in the next devlog. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I hope you have a great holiday.